The best way to learn a language? Immersion, living where the language is spoken and using it every day. But if that's not in the cards for you this year, you can still learn a language the second best way, and that's with Babbel. Be a better you in 2024 with Babbel, the science-backed language learning app that actually works. Don't pay hundreds of dollars for private tutors or waste hours on apps that don't really help you speak the language. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons are handcrafted by over 200 language experts to help you start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks. Babbel's designed by real people for real conversations. Babbel's tips and tools are approachable, accessible, rooted in real-life situations, and delivered with conversation-based teaching so you're ready to practice what you've learned in the real world. For instance, I've been using Babbel's convenient courses to help me learn basic conversational skills in German while I'm getting ready for a little trip I'm planning. It's not a language I'd ever studied before, but I find the lessons really easy and kind of like hand-holding me through learning a completely new language to me. And it's reassuring to know that with the help of Babbel, I'll be able to greet people, order food, and ask for directions without having to consult language apps while I'm in Deutschland. I'm still learning. Studies from Yale, Michigan State University, and others continue to prove Babbel is better. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. Babbel has over 16 million subscriptions sold. Plus, all of Babbel's 14 award-winning language courses are backed by their 20-day money-back guarantee. Here's a special limited-time deal for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/vulgar. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/vulgar, spelled BABBEL.com/vulgar. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Hi, I'm Jennifer, a founder of the Go Kid Go network. At Go Kid Go, putting kids first is at the heart of every show that we produce. That's why we're so excited to introduce a brand new show to our network called The Search for the Silver Lining, a fantasy adventure series about a spirited young girl named Isla who time travels to the mythical land of Camelot. Look for The Search for the Silver Lining on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello and welcome to Vulgar History, a feminist women's history comedy podcast. My name is Anne Foster, and I feel like this is going to be a major episode. The longest one that I've done to date was Catherine Gray, which was like an hour and a half-ish. It was like an hour, 23 minutes or something. And given how many pages of notes I have, which is 11 and a half pages of notes, given that I usually have like 6 or 7. I feel like this might be a long one. I also feel pretty confident that this is also going to be among the highest scoringest episodes of Vulgar History, just based on, I've got that many pages because there's that much stuff that happens. That means there's that much stuff this woman did. It's one of my favorites. This is a big deal for me. We've done lots of women who I feel very strongly about, historical figures, Frances Howard, Caroline of Brunswick, but we're really getting into one of my personal favorites of all time. I consider her a heavy hitter. You may not, because have you heard of her? I don't know. But who we're talking about is Marguerite of Valois, Queen of Navarre, aka Queen Margot, which was a nickname one of her brothers gave her. And we're going to just call her Margot because this is the fourth Margaret so far this season. And the last one had like multiple Margarets in it. She's Margot, just so we can tell her apart from everybody else. And because that's what she went by. And also because I first learned about her story from the 1994 film. The English language title of it is Queen Margot, but it's a French film. And the original French title is La Reine Margot. It's by the director Patrice Chéreau. It stars Isabelle Adjani. It is, oh my God, Verna Lisi plays her mother, Catherine de Medici. It is such a good movie. The fashion, amazing. My favorite show of all time, Reign, which was on the CW a few years ago, the costume designer for Rain, which I also loved their costume design, said that she was largely inspired initially by the movie Queen Margot, because it has just the way it really captured timeless quality and also a fashionable quality, while sort of nodding to the historical time period without being like too constrained by it. Anyway, it's such a good movie. I was just checking. I'm like, well, where's it streaming so that you guys can all watch it? And I don't think it is streaming anywhere that I could find. But if you just look on YouTube for Queen Margot or La Reine Margot and then full movie, like you can pretty easily track it down, or you can purchase it on DVD or Blu-ray disc. It's so good. And so that movie is based on a novel by Alexandre Dumas, the author of The Three Musketeers and other books like that. So he had a whole kick where he was just writing stories of French people. So he was in a sense the Philippa Gregory of his time, where he just really looked at kind of all the most scandalous rumors about a person and wrote them up in a novel, like, hey, this is what happened, maybe. So the movie Queen Margot is based on his novel, and his novel is based on accounts of the time, and accounts of the time are based on Margot's life. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. Another great source is a book by Nancy Goldstone. It's called The Rival Queens, Catherine de' Medici, her daughter Marguerite de Valois, and the Betrayal That Ignited a Kingdom. I mean, what a title. Incredible. It really gets into, I think my trajectory was like, I watched Rain and loved it. So then I watched Queen Margot to see what the fashion was like. And then I'm just like, who is this person? So then I read The Rival Queens. And then, of course, I got numerous facts from Wikipedia.com. And I'm really excited. I hope you are too. So Margot was born in 1553. She was the 7th child and the 3rd daughter born to King Henry II of France, who I guess would be King Henri. And I guess, warning, this takes place in France, so I'm going to uncontrollably start pronouncing some things with a Lumiere, Jerry Orbach as Lumiere in Beauty and the Beast level French accent. So if that's not your thing, there's other podcasts you can listen to because I can't help it. So Margot's parents were King Henri II of France and his wife Catherine de' Medici, who is also one of my historical main. I'm a huge fan of her story and talking about her, and that's going to be an episode for later, and her episode will probably be even longer than this. Anyway, Margot was the 7th child, 3rd daughter of these two, the King and Queen of France. So her older brothers and sisters were basically all sort of frail and sort of ill and had various physical, what were described then as like deformities. So they just had lots of physical issues, including just health things, as well as just like, I don't know how to describe it. Basically, nobody was talking about the great beauty of any of her older brothers and sisters. But then she, by contrast, it's like all the beauty was saved aside just to be all given to her. So she was apparently a great beauty with a wonderful sense of style. As a teen/adult, foreign delegations wrote lengthy letters back to their home countries about how gorgeous she was, basically describing her as one of the 7 wonders of the world. So part of this, for sure, would be how beautiful she was. Part of it might just be like how beautiful she was compared to the siblings who were around her. And part of it, I think, in a Cleopatra-like way, was just her charisma was so incredible that you just are blown away by her. So, but we're starting with childhood. Her childhood was spent in a French royal nursery with her older sisters Elizabeth and Claude. Claude, by the way, is a great name for a girl. Recommend that. Bring that back. And they're cared for by a woman. Oh my God, my cat is going to walk on my laptop. Are you excited about this? Or do you just want water? I don't know. So she and her sisters were raised under the care of Charlotte de Vienne, the Baronne de Courton, a wise and virtuous lady greatly attached to the Catholic religion. So, side note, France, super Catholic country at this point. At least the royal family was. This is going to become quite important as the story goes on. And both of her older sisters got married. They're quite a bit older than her. So after they married and they were sent off, Margot grew up in the Chateau d'Amboise with her brothers Henri and Francis, who were the ones closest to her age. And it was during her childhood, her brother Charles, gave her the nickname of Margot. So just she, her siblings, hanging out, being kids together. When she was 6, her father Henri, the king, died from a jousting accident. He got like a splinter in his eye or something like that. And her oldest brother Francis became king, aged 15. Her brother Francis, fun fact, was married to Mary Queen of Scots, who is another heavy hitter who I'm going to talk about later. So Mary Queen of Scots, though, spent most of her childhood in France, even though she's the Queen of Scots for various reasons I'll explain in a different episode. But so Mary Queen of Scots grew up with them all, so almost like an honorary sibling, so she would have known Margot quite well as well. Margot studied grammar, classics, history, the Bible, and learned to speak Italian, Spanish, Latin, and Greek, in addition to French, obviously, because she was French. She was competent in prose, poetry, horsemanship, and dancing, so just well-rounded. Her brother Francis, or I guess he'd be called what, Francois, was only king for 1 year before he died of an ear infection, or possibly was poisoned by Protestants, because I said France was a big Catholic country, and the royals were, but there's a big amount of Protestants who wanted France to be a big Protestant country. He probably died of an ear infection, though. He was like sick all the time, Francois. So he died without an heir. Mary Queen of Scots sent back to Scotland, and again, that's a whole other episode. And the next king of France was the next oldest brother, who was 10-year-old Charles. So at this point, Margot is like 7 years old. So it's a brother who's close in age to her, the one who called her Margot. Because these were 2 boy kings in a row, their mother, Catherine de' Medici, effectively controlled everything in their name because she was a very effective, controlling, powerful person. And yeah, so it's that thing with the boy king where he's just kind of like doesn't do much and people around him do lots of stuff. What was it like growing up at this time in French court? So Margot's future mother-in-law wrote about Margot. She is beautiful, discreet, and graceful, but she has grown up in the most vicious and corrupt atmosphere imaginable. I cannot see that anyone escapes its poison. Because basically, during the time that Margot was a young person, French royal court was a place of publicly performed religious devotion and privately held licentious abandon. So just like lots of sex going on. And this is, again, getting back to the movie Queen Margot. There's just like Margot is just kind of like wandering down the hallway looking kind of bored, and all around her there's just like people having an orgy, and she's just like, meh, I've seen it, you know, like whatever. Her mother, Catherine de' Medici, kept a close eye on everything with the assistance of her female servants, who were called, this is true, the Flying Squadron, and they were courtesan/spies. So they were just kind of sexy spy ladies in waiting who kept an eye out on everything and slept with everybody, all the important men, so they could let Catherine know what was going on all the time. And they all together helped cultivate an atmosphere of corruption, sexy times, and ruthless ambition, where everybody was spying for somebody, nobody could be trusted, and everyone was having sex with everybody. Beauty was prized above all else, luckily for Margot, as, you know, the 7th wonder of the world. So she was also a princess. So she was a beautiful princess, and that was very valuable at the time. When she was 8, because all this is how she's still a kid, Margot's role in royal court was defined by her engagement to Henri. There's only one Margaret in the story, who's actually Margot/Marguerite, but there are a lot of people named Henry/Henri. So as a 8-year-old, she was engaged to Henri of Navarre. Navarre was a nearby principality close to France, like kind of is part of what France is now. And he was also sent to be raised with her at court, like how Mary Queen of Scots was. You're just like kids and you're raised alongside your siblings and also your future spouse. But what this leads to is she seemed to perhaps come to see her fiance as kind of just one more obnoxious brother, because she had so many brothers. We're just going to call her boy fiance Navarre. He's Henri of Navarre, but there's going to be a lot of Henris. So he's Navarre from now on. Like most royal princesses and girls at this time, Margot is a pawn to be used by her family to cement political relations with other royal families, to provide heirs, and to help maintain and expand her family's stronghold over France and the nearby principalities like Navarre. But here's the thing. Margot wanted something more. Beauty and the Beast also takes place in France, the Disney film. She wants much more than this, not provincial life, but this licentious sex court life. She wanted passion, romance, and adventure. She also was brought up in this place, not unlike our culture, where being beautiful and youthful was kind of the most important thing. So she wanted to marry someone super handsome, the sort of man who was her equivalent, who would turn eyes every time he entered a room, but who would also be strong and manly and brave. Is that a lot to ask for? Regrettably, she was engaged to Navarre, who was basically nothing at all like that. And as I said, grew up with her and was kind of more like a pesky younger brother figure than someone she would ever want as her lover. So, but also, perhaps more than Navarre's apparently not amazingly attractive looks and his immature personality, he and his family were Huguenots, which is a French way of saying Protestants, and I do not know the details of the Catholic/Protestant divide in France other than what was on the TV show Reign. But Huguenots, I think they're just basically Protestants. And there's this great religious tension. So Navarre's mother was called Jeanne d'Albret, who was very cool also, and she was not a fan of Margot's Catholic royal family. Jeanne was especially not a fan of Margot's mother, Catherine de Medici, who was from Italy, and people thought poisoned people all the time, / also she did poison people all the time. So Jeanne was maybe right to be suspicious. I'm not sure if this is in my notes, but especially because later on Jeanne would die because of allegedly poisoned gloves, allegedly given to her by Catherine de Medici. So Jeanne d'Albret saw her son being kept at French court as something kind of like kidnapping because they were Catholics and Catherine was so whatever, Italian, which she didn't like. So Jeanne schemed to escape with her son back to their home palace in Navarre, because I'm calling him Navarre, but he's Henri of Navarre, Navarre being the place he is from. So when Navarre and Margot were both about 14, Jeanne successfully kidnapped him, or just kind of grabbed him and ran. So not only that, her plan counted on Catherine her plan counted on Catherine unknowingly funding their flight. So somehow she had tricked Catherine de Medici to pay for this. Not sure what that was, but like good scheminess there for Jeanne. Catherine de Medici was really mad. Margot was probably secretly relieved because she didn't really want to marry this guy. And now there was seemingly no way she'd ever be forced to marry this annoying little brother type person, because Navarre's family had just betrayed her family so cruelly. And as fate would have it, the absence of one Henri was filled with the arrival of another in the form of Henri, the Duke of Guise, who I'm just going to call de Guise, because, again, there's a lot of Henris in the story. So de Guise, the thing is, was gorgeous. He was 3 years older than her. She's 15 at this point. He's 18. He was tall and blonde, athletic, charming, and valiant in the battlefield. He was also well known for his skill at seduction. And in a court obsessed with physical beauty, he rose to become Margot's equal, sort of a prom king and queen type scenario. And by now, Margot was 15, so she had been the prettiest girl, and now she was the loveliest woman at court. And not just for her physical appearance, but her sense of style, her gracefulness at dancing, and her charming personality. So she was just head and shoulders above literally everybody else. De Guise was the same thing, man version. So they seemed like a perfect match. And politically, it seemed like an appropriate setup, because especially Margot's older sister Claude had already married into the de Guise family, And his family had taken roles as senior advisors to her brother, King Charles. So it all seemed like everything's coming up Margot, but I'm on page 2 of 13, so buckle up. What happened next is that the de Guise family got caught up in a conspiracy to kidnap King Charles, which destroyed friendly relations between the two families, as it does when someone conspires to kidnap someone who is the king. So up until now, Margot had somehow managed to avoid the cutthroat Game of Thrones type situation constantly playing out among her siblings and her mother. But her relationship with de Guise kind of, I don't know. She was in a bubble of just being gorgeous and liking boys, and then suddenly she's like, oh shit, now I have to start scheming too, I guess. And then enter the story's third Henri, who is Margot's brother, Prince Henri, Duke of Anjou, who we're going to just call Anjou for now. Margot and Anjou were good friends growing up. They're a similar age, I think. Anjou was Catherine's favorite child, and he hated his brother, King Charles. Charles, in return, hated Anjou for the way that Catherine obviously liked him better, and he hated how Anjou clearly wanted to be king instead of him. Anjou also hated de Guise because he was taller and more handsome and was better as a soldier. So when Anjou learned that Margot had feelings for de Guise, Anjou saw a way to use that to his advantage. So Anjou manipulated Margot to side with him against Charles by flattering her, then coerced her to advocate for his interests with their mother, getting closer to Catherine so that Margot would be the first with her and the last to leave her. Catherine didn't know why Margot was suddenly so close to her, but with Anjou off fighting battles, she began to shower Margot with attention, making her the favorite now, opening up to her with her most private thoughts. So for 4 months, which is June to October 1569, Margot did just what her brother had asked of her because she trusted him and she liked him. And then things got pretty weird. I don't super understand the precise betrayal that occurred, but here is my best understanding of it. Anjou snitched to Catherine that Margot wanted to marry de Guise. Catherine, of course, hated de Guise at this point because this is post the whole betrayal situation. Margot was close to Catherine, and that made everything risky for her and for her brother Anjou, because Margot knew some of Catherine's secrets. Oh, and then if she married de Guise, then Margot potentially could tell de Guise more of Catherine's secrets or something like that. So Catherine was just like, well, we can't have this. We can't have Margot marrying de Guise. The main thing was that Anjou alleged that not only did Margot want to marry de Guise, she was trying to make it happen actively. Was she? Probably not. Anjou's just a dick. So, and just like in England, princesses can't just decide who they're going to marry. It has to be approved by the king, and in this case, by Catherine de Medici, who is effectively the king's mother. So, Catherine, if you followed all of that, effectively, Anjou just fucked Margot over by blabbing on her to Catherine and making it all sound worse. So Catherine got so mad at Margot for going behind her back, allegedly, and Margot would never forgive Anjou for setting her up and then selling her out. So this is just a falling out between all three people, but Anjou is still Catherine's favorite. But, having said all of that, Margot and de Guise likely weren't even lovers. They maybe flirted or wanted to get married to each other, but they probably... Oh, that's part of it. Anjou told Catherine that Margot was lovers with Anjou. This was one of the rumors spread by her family's enemies later on to try and make her look like a sex-mad nymphomaniac. There's a lot of rumors about Margot and her alleged lovers, and some of them are true and some of them are not true, but this one seems like the two of them weren't actually together at any point. So note, at this point, there are unsubstantiated rumors that Anjou, and potentially some of her other brothers, sexually abused Margot. Anjou definitely seemed to psychologically manipulate her, but he, not to excuse him, but he did seem to enjoy manipulating anybody. For instance of Anjou's fuckery. So at one point, when de Guise was recovering from an injury, Anjou arranged for de Guise to return to French court, where Margot happened to be also convalescing from an illness. De Guise visited her frequently, doing his best to assure her that his family was back in the royal family's good graces, even though that was not true. Unclear, did de Guise want to marry her, or was he just trying to seduce her? Anyway, this whole thing came to a head because one of Margot's ladies in waiting, who was secretly in the payroll for Anjou, brought one of Margot's letters to de Guise, to the king. And I think the lesson we learned from that is just this family is fucked up, and also you shouldn't have letter-based evidence of your secret sexy relationships with forbidden French dudes. But also, so Anjou just like fucked around with her. And did they also sexually abuse and assault her? Who knows? But that also was a rumor that was spread because of people who were enemies of her and of her brothers later on. If you watch the movie Queen Margot, it just seems like the whole family is having sex with each other all the time as part of the just like licentiousness. But again, that is a movie based on a book, based on a lot of rumors. Oh my God. So all this happened. Anjou fucked her over. And then Charles, her brother, was really upset by her apparent betrayal that he sent for Catherine. And then he and Catherine dragged Margot from her bed and beat her, quote, viciously. And this had the desired effect. So again, the root cause of all of this was just goddamn Anjou fucking things up just because he sucks. Using the king against Margot, but using Margot to make himself look better in front of his mother. Ultimately, the goal of whoever engineered this was achieved, which is that Margot, terrified of her family for obvious and understandable reasons, agreed to stay away from de Guise. She felt that she would not be safe from rumors of their involvement, which might lead to a bad reputation or maybe more beatings until she was married. She went to her sister Claude, hoping that Claude could compel de Guise to marry someone else. Because remember, Claude was married to another one of the de Guise family, and Claude did her a solid. In this family, sisters are much better than brothers. De Guise was married very quickly to another woman. Margot and her family attended the ceremony because this is all like a very murder-y high school where no one can ever avoid seeing each other at the big parties, kind of like on Gossip Girl. But the lessons that she learned through this wild sequence of events was one that would come to serve her for the rest of her life. In order to survive within this royal court and within this murderous family, she needed to remain vigilant and careful and suspicious of everybody constantly. So, a hard-learned lesson. By this point, Catherine, who had a very strong and forceful personality, had alienated a lot of other important families, such that she was having trouble finding people like sons to marry Margot. So, despite her best efforts to try and find literally anyone else, she re-implemented the engagement of Margot to Henri of Navarre, the annoying boy who she'd grown up with. Yes, he was still a Protestant, and yes, his mother was still one of Catherine's most hated enemies, but a marriage between these two was seen as it would be politically expedient because there were all these religious battles going, like it was ripping France apart, the Catholics versus the Huguenots / Protestants. But like the Catholic / Protestant divide was pretty major. So it was incomprehensible for a Catholic and a Protestant to marry. And so the assumption was that Margot would ultimately convert to her husband's religion and become Protestant. Margot was very, very, very Catholic and religious. And she saw this as being literally condemned to hell because she thought if she stopped being Catholic, she would go to hell. So the pamphlets or whatever that really liked to make Margot this kind of like sensationalized figure would claim that Margot didn't want to marry Navarre because he was ugly and had a super unappealing personality, both of which things were true, but Margot's own writings, because yes, she did write her memoirs at one point. She emphasized that religion was the biggest motivating factor behind her not wanting to marry him. She was super Catholic, and also he sucked, so she didn't want to marry him. But what she wanted did not matter very much because marriage preparations began right away. And in fact, it was during the planning of the wedding that Navarre's mother, Jeanne, collapsed dead while out shopping for gloves. Physicians at the time claimed she died of natural causes, but rumors persisted that Catherine had killed her with a set of poison gloves. And frankly, if that was a possibility, I would also subscribe to that theory because poison gloves is an amazing rumor. So this was also, side note, the preparation and the wedding itself occurred during a heat wave, and it can get really hot in France. So just imagine that too. Everything is just really hot and sweaty, and they're all wearing, lots of layers of oldie time clothes. It was just, a powder keg ready to explode. So everyone was sweaty and tired, and I'm sure all they ever drank in this time, well, I'm not sure, but didn't they only drink wine because the water was bad? So they're all just constantly drunk / hungover, sun exhausted, sweaty, just, it's not a pleasant time. Again, you really get that sense in the film Queen Margot. So Margot and Henry, both 19 years old, were married on August 18th, 1572 at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. The marriage was controversial because of their different religions. The Pope refused to grant a dispensation for the wedding, and the different faiths of the bridal couple made for an unusual wedding service, such as Navarre had to remain outside the cathedral during the Mass, where his place was taken by Margot's brother, who she hated, Anjou, but he was there for the "do you take this bride?" oldie time French vows part of it. A 17th historian named Francois Eudes de Mézeray invented the anecdote that Margot was forced to marry Navarre by Charles, who pushed down her head as though she were nodding her assent when she refused to marry. I think that happens in the movie. But this was not true. This was propaganda to justify some stuff that happened later on. So Margot has had she's been torn to shreds a lot. And a lot of it is based on this propaganda against her and against her family for later reasons that I'll explain. Margot did not mention having to have her brother nod her head for her in her memoirs, and no one who was actually around wrote about it. So it's just this guy, Francois, invented this story later on. As was the custom for a royal marriage, the ceremony itself was followed by 4 days of celebration, which I am also in favor of. As was not the custom, at the end of these 4 days, Catherine arranged for many of the visiting Protestants to be assassinated. So here's what happened. So after Jeanne died of poisoned gloves, Navarre, so when she was dead, Margot's husband, Henri of Navarre, became the King of Navarre, and as such, effectively the leader of the Huguenots / Protestants. So because of his high profile, most of the prominent French Protestants came to Paris to celebrate the marriage, especially because they also assumed Margot was going to convert. So there's a lot of backroom deals going on. Everybody was backstabbing everybody, just lots of shifty eyes. And it wound up with Catherine arranging an assassination attempt on a leading Protestant general, and then she framed the Huguenots for the crime, even though she had done it. The night that this happened, Margot was sitting with Huguenots, all of whom were surprised and confused by what was happening. Margot saw clearly none of them had been involved because she was right there with them. They did not know that this assassination was going to happen. So the next day, word began to spread that the Huguenots had been behind this attempt themselves, in an attempt to try and make it look like the Catholics had done it. So the layers of this. So Catherine attempted to assassinate a prominent Huguenot, and then she framed the Huguenots for it, pretending it was a false flag that they had done to frame her, but really she had done it to frame them, just her mind. It was a mess. And what happened is that Catholics started killing Protestants, and this became known as the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. And lots and lots and lots of people were killed all over France, not just in Paris. This happened over a period of, I feel like, days or weeks. It was an extreme, this is, you might imagine, one of the climactic events in the movie. The night that this slaughter began, Margot was woken from her sleep. She had been sleeping by herself, not with Navarre, by a Huguenot stranger stumbling through her door, grievously injured in this slaughter. This guy was pursued by armed guards, including 4 archers, which I just note as interesting. Just archers, like just guys with bows and arrows just running down the hallway pursuing you, would be pretty scary and also pretty awesome looking. Margot, acting apparently entirely on instinct, and this is the first major moment that truly defined what she was like as a person, threw herself between the stranger and the palace guards, determined to kill him. The guards were ordered away, and Margot was permitted to tend to the wounded man, saving his life. She then set out to see what she could do, because she was now the Queen of Navarre. She wanted to help protect other Huguenots who were under threat, including her new husband. In her memoirs, Margot remembered that she saved the lives of several prominent Protestants during the massacre by keeping them in her rooms and refusing to admit the assassins. Her eyewitness account of this massacre is the only one from the whole royal family of what things were like for them. So her husband, Henri Navarre, had been forced to convert to Catholicism to save his life for the time being. This was really major. He probably also felt like he was going to go to hell for switching religions, so this is very humiliating for him. And then Catherine forced him to parade into a Catholic mass, being like, look who's Catholic now, this guy. And then she set out to have the marriage annulled because they had done their work in her master plan to make a whole religious massacre happen. Given that they had only just gotten married, and they almost definitely had not yet consummated their union, this probably could have been done pretty quickly, this annulment. And Catherine probably was planning, once Margot was freed of her husband, she could probably have Navarre killed. But the thing is, Margot knew that this was the plan. And as much as she probably wanted to be freed of marriage to a man who she did not want to be married to, she already felt guilty for her complicity in the massacre, which is like, girl, it wasn't your fault. Like, how could you have known? Well, I don't know. She probably knew her mother was up to something, but how could she have known her mother was up to this? Let me just look this up. One sec. I'm just looking at more about the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. So just to really come across the massiveness of this. So, as per Wikipedia, this was a targeted group of assassinations and a wave of Catholic mob violence directed against the Huguenots, French Calvinist Protestants. The massacre took place a few days after the wedding of Margot to Navarre. The massacre began the night of the 23rd to the 24th of August, 1572, the feast of Bartholomew, which is why it's St. Bartholomew's Day. That's 2 days after Catherine's alleged attempted assassination. Okay, so the slaughter spread throughout Paris, lasting several weeks. The massacre expanded outward to the countryside and other urban centers. Modern estimates for the number of dead across France vary widely, from 5,000 to 30,000. The massacre also marked a turning point in the French wars of religion. The Huguenot political movement was crippled by the loss of so many of its prominent aristocratic leaders because they were all in Paris for the wedding. They were just lured in, as well as many reconversions. A bunch of people went back to being Catholics again. It was the worst of the century's religious massacres, quote somebody on Wikipedia. Throughout Europe, it printed on Protestant minds the indelible conviction that Catholicism was a bloody and treacherous religion. So this all happened just after her wedding, to which Margot, I can see why she would have felt guilty for her part in this, but like, it was not her fault, I don't think. Effectively, she didn't want her husband's blood on her hands too, after she felt like she had the blood of like 30,000 French Protestants. So, sort of like first she saved the stranger's life, which if you watch the movie, he turns into her lover and it gets very sexy. But in real life, it was just a stranger who she saved because she was like a good person. And then what she did in a similar way, she refused the annulment. She said that annulment was impossible because she had already had sexual relations with Henri and was in every sense his wife. Later, she wrote in her memoirs, "I suspected the design of separating me from my husband was in order to work some mischief against him, so she saved his life. by claiming that they had had sex already when they probably hadn't, and she totally could have lied about it. So in so doing, her husband now is sort of in her protection, meaning her family could never kill him because it was her husband. In a brutal twist, Henri of Navarre never learned that she had done this for him. He assumed incorrectly that Margot had been involved in her family's treachery, and the night she spent chatting with the Huguenots, she had known what was to come. Her true motivations were never revealed until her memoirs were published, long after both of them had died. So that's just #tragique. So, the way that life always does, even after a life-altering, horrifying thing happens, is that life just returns pretty much back to normal in a weird way. Henri of Navarre was now a tentative ally to Margot's family, and he was invited along with Anjou and others to help quell an uprising in the countryside because he was quote-unquote Catholic at this point. In his absence, Margot was left alone, a married woman of 19, a much freer and more enjoyable status than she'd enjoyed as a single, unmarried teenager. So while he was away, she joined up with the most fabulous girl squad at court, led by Henriette de Cleves and Catherine de Clermont Dampierre, attending all of their soirees and parties, socializing with artists and writers and great thinkers of the age. Due to their beauty and proximity to creative minds and artists, this group of noblewomen became known as the Muses of Paris. And I have to say, I know I keep talking about the movie, you can watch it or not, but Henriette is in the movie and she is amazing. She's the coolest person in the movie. There's a part during, I think it's during the massacre, she's just like, Maha! Like, she's just like, loves the chaos. She's so cool. So at one of these soirees being hosted by the Muses of Paris, Margot met Joseph de Boniface, known as La Mole. La Mole was an infamous ladies' man, 20 years older than her, a sort of cooler, more grown-up version of her first love, de Guise. I picture him sort of like George Clooney circa the first Ocean's 11 movie, just sort of like an adult man, just very dapper and charming with like a roguish glint in the eye. Apparently, La Mole was so skilled at wooing women, he had been sent as France's representative when Catherine was trying to convince Queen Elizabeth I to marry one of her sons. So she didn't send her sons. She sent this sexy guy to try and be like, hey, ooh la la, like marry one of these French guys. Maybe they'll be as handsome as me. He was also a friend to Margot's other brother, whose name was Hercules, but then he changed his name to Francois after the death of their older brother, Francois. And he was the Duke of Alençon. And so I'm going to call him Alençon. Or maybe Francoise. Apparently the fact he was called Hercules, or I guess Hercule, was when he was like small and like not particularly Hercules looking, made him sort of the butt of jokes, which is partially also why he changed his name. Meanwhile, Margot's other brother, Charles, was still king. He had a fragile... You know what? How many times has this happened this season? Just like what's-his-face in the Isabel Portugal story, Henry VI, the Margaret of Anjou story, Charles was a boy king who just like could not deal, which is fine if you're a person, but when you're the king, it's just a sucky way to be. He had a fragile mental state, and he was often ill, like all of the siblings were. His younger brother, Anjou, was elected king of Poland. I'm not sure what that is about, but just note that. Oh my god. I only vaguely understand this. I'll just read to you what it says, and hopefully you will get the gist. So, Anjou, elected king of Poland. Anjou was also a big fan of suppressing Protestants. So a group of moderate Catholics called the Malcontents supported a plan to get rid of Charles and Anjou, and in their place elect the third brother, Francois, as the new king instead, because he was more moderate and less of a religious fanatic. Because Margot hated her other two brothers, she helped Francois with his coup along with her fellow muses, Henriette and Catherine of Clermont. But then the conspiracy was exposed. The leaders of the plot were arrested and decapitated. Francois begged for forgiveness and he was granted it from the king, but La Mole became the fall guy for the plot. He was found guilty largely due to the existence of a wax figurine pricked with needles found in his room, in which was thought to be a threat to the king, which is the wildest twist since Poison Gloves in the story. But guess what? The story's not done. La Mole was put to death, and in one of those rumors that is so great, I really hope it's true, Margot is said to have had his head preserved for her to keep with her always. In the book by Alexandre Dumas, and in the movie, she does this. She just takes his head and pieces the fuck out of there. So, what's up? So, her brother Francois and her husband Henri of Navarre were being held as prisoners at this point because of just all this infighting between all the dudes. Then Charles died without an heir, meaning the new king was Margot's brother Anjou, who became King Henri the Third, I think. At this point, so when he became the king, Francois and Henri of Navarre were freed but kept under surveillance and allowed to return to royal court. But Anjou still hated Margot from that whole betrayal thing from when they were teenagers and didn't let her return. Meanwhile, guess who doesn't get along? Margot and her husband. Things deteriorated because this is just a lot of stuff to go through, and they're in their like early 20s, like in a marriage. How much has happened between them? And they didn't even like each other to begin with. Anjou was suspicious of Margot and threatened by her. I wrote this backwards. Anjou was suspicious of and threatened by his sister Margot, especially because she and Navarre seemed to be getting along better. So Anjou was like, I need to fuck this shit up and make their marriage deteriorate. Because a happy king and queen of Navarre were a threat to the king of France. So Anjou pulled some more classic That's So Anjou schemes. For instance, he set up Navarre with a new mistress who happened to be also one of Catherine de Medici, who's still around, puppet mastering everybody. She's one of the flying squadron of courtesan spies. So Navarre has a new mistress who is spying on him for Catherine. And Anjou, because remember, Anjou is Catherine's favorite son. Anjou also arranged for Margot to be caught in a compromising position to further alienate her from the rest of the family. So he is just the worst, even amidst some truly terrible people. So this all worked. Navarre and Margot were not getting along very well. They didn't even see each other very much. He only approached his wife when it served his interests and did not hesitate to abandon her if it did not. For her part, Margot perhaps took advantage of the absence of her husband to take a lover. And the next person in the was he her lover or not is the famous Bussy d'Amboise. That is spelled first name Bussy. Bussy d'Amboise. Bussy was a gentleman, a swordsman, a dandy, and a lover of all genders. He was also potentially a lover of Margot's brother Anjou, because this is just a really fucked up story. So, through all of this lover-taking, husband-wife arguing, Francois, Margot's brother, and Navarre were still under surveillance from their past coup attempt. They both eventually fled. Navarre did not even warn Margot he was leaving. He just was gone one day. Margot, fucked over again by useless men in her life, found herself confined to her chambers in the Louvre, which was not a museum at that point. I had to look that up. It was a castle. She was not confined to an art museum. But she was confined under suspicion as her husband's accomplice for his escape, even though she had nothing to do with it. In fact, she wrote in her memoirs that actually she had an okay time in confinement. And guess what? The season is women trapped in towers and the assholes who sent them there. This is not even the trapped in towers moment, the biggest one in the story. She will be trapped in other towers. She wrote, I found a secret pleasure during my confinement from the perusal of good books, to which I had given myself up with a delight I never before experienced. My captivity and its consequent solitude afforded me the double advantage of exciting a passion for study and an inclination for devotion, advantages I had never experienced during the vanities and splendor of my prosperity. So just like the people who did okay / thrived during COVID quarantine. She was just like, you know what? I liked having this time by myself to just read books and learn new skills. This is resiliency. So, but meanwhile, everybody else, you know what? Considering everything that happened to her, it's like, yeah, you know what? Just like read your books. Like just be away from all your awful brothers, your awful husband, and just like do you. So meanwhile, her brother Francois, who by now was allied with the Huguenots, took up arms and refused to negotiate until his sister was set free, even though she was like thriving and didn't mind. But because of that, Margot was released and then assisted her mother in some peace talks, which is like an interesting, that reminds me of Isabella I. She had some peace talk moments, wasn't she? As like a teen mediator. If you're keeping track, so Navarre was Protestant again. He had been Catholic to save his life, but now he's like really Protestant again. And he tried to get Margot to join him in his kingdom of Navarre. They reconciled to the point that she was returning his letters and telling him the court gossip, but Catherine de' Medici and Anjou refused to release her to her husband, fearing that Margot would become a hostage in the hands of the Huguenots, or she would act to strengthen the alliance between Francois and Navarre, because she probably would, because those are the people she supported, because Catherine and Anjou were terrible to her constantly. In 1577, Margot is given permission to go on a mission in the south of the Netherlands on behalf of her younger brother, Francois. Anjou let her do this because it meant he could maybe get rid of Francois by making him the new king of the Netherlands. Okay. Just like, oh, my brother's bothering me. It'd be great to get him out of town. Could we make him king of the Netherlands? I feel like maybe that's how Anjou became king of, what was it, Poland? Anyway, this is just there. It's just like a normal life, but just like exploded on this international scale. So Margot was like, cool, I'm on it. So she pretended to be going to take the spa waters. She left Paris with her court and then devoted 2 months to her mission. At every stage of the journey, during brilliant receptions, the Queen of Navarre, aka Margot, was entertained with gentlemen who were potential allies, and while praising her brother, she tried to persuade them to join Francois. Was that it? God, I don't even know what her mission is, but I'm sure she's doing amazing at it. She met the governor of the Netherlands, Don Juan of Austria. Almost 1/4 of her memoirs are devoted to this mission. I'm so sorry, Margot. I did not read your memoirs, and I don't understand this mission. It sounds like she did a great job, charmed everybody, but at the end, Francoise was incapable of defeating the Spanish army, so it didn't work out, whatever she's trying to do. I don't know. So, Margot returned to royal court, where Anjou and Francoise were still fighting constantly. Margot's perhaps lover, Bussy, got in the middle of it. Anjou eventually had Francoise arrested. Bussy was also taken to the Bastille and fled. I guess he escaped in a very dramatic way. I picture like Bussy. I just picture him with a cloak, just like running around sort of like tuxedo mask on Sailor Moon. Margot helped Francoise escape by throwing a rope out of her window. She later denied helping with his escape and was believed. I'm just giving you a list of wild facts that all put together is this woman's life story. At this point, they believed that she didn't help him escape, and she was finally given permission to join her husband in Navarre. So, she did. They settled in Nerac, capital of Navarre, which was part of the Kingdom of France, and where the religious regulations and intolerance did not apply, so she was allowed to be Catholic still, while her husband was Protestant still. This was like very revolutionary for the age to be a Catholic married to a Protestant. Whilst there, Margot worked to create a refined court that would be a true literary academy that welcomed poets and thinkers. And this is where I'm just like, is she Belle from Beauty and the Beast, but just raised wildly differently? She just loves learning and books. The court of Nerac became especially famous for the amorous adventures that occurred there, aka sexy times, to the point of apparently Shakespeare's play Love's Labour's Lost was inspired by this. Margot allegedly had an affair with a man who is one of her husband's companions, the Vicomte de Turenne. Her husband Navarre endeavored to conquer all the maids of honor who accompanied his wife. So it's just like sex happened, kind of like when she was a kid, but this feels like she's more in control of the situation and maybe less murderousness. In 1579, a religious war called the Lovers' War broke out between the Huguenots and Navarre himself. During this conflict, Margot took the side of her husband. This lasted about a year, thanks in part to Margot's idea to get her brother Francois to lead negotiations, which were rapid and culminated in peace. So he was good at that. So Francois came in, peace negotiations, peaced out. And then Margot's marriage to Henri of Navarre deteriorated yet more, potentially because they're both constantly sleeping with other people. Margot fell in love with her brother's senior attendant, Jacques de Harlay, Lord of Chambellan. Navarre was involved. I found it described as an affair, but I feel like because he was a fully adult man and the person he's involved with is a 14-year-old girl, but so he became involved with a 14-year-old lady-in-waiting named Françoise de Montmorency Fossaux, known as La Belle Fosseuse, who became pregnant. Margot proposed banishing her from court out of jealousy because she, if you hadn't noticed, has not had any children at this point. But La Belle Fosseuse screamed that she would refuse to cooperate if she was banished. La Belle Fosseuse really worked against Margot, tried to incite Henry to hate Margot, hoping that maybe she could be married to him. Françoise gave birth to a daughter, but the child was stillborn. Margot wrote in her memoirs about this, "It pleased God that she should bring forth a daughter since dead," which is like very cold, Margot. 1582, Margot returned to Paris. She was initially well received by her brother, the king, King Henry III, aka Anjou. She wrote to her husband to try and convince him to join her in Paris, but he refused. Margot, oh my god, La Belle Fosseuse was still her lady-in-waiting. Margot was finally able to fire her with help of her mother, Catherine de Medici. This made her husband really mad because he loved being involved with this 14-year-old person. So then in retaliation, I guess, Margot resumed her relationship with Chambellan, who is in Paris now as well. Meanwhile, Margot's relationship with her brother, Anjou, was also strained, which, when was it not? So, Anjou, Francis King Henry III, alternated between a life of just like debauchery and like sexiness and crises of mysticism and just like religious obsession. Margot mocked him and made enemies of two of his chief supporters who retaliated by circulating very injurious reports about her private life. So this is where all of the like Margot's such a big slut pamphlets came about from. Let's see. In addition, Margot encouraged François to continue his expedition into the Netherlands. This is still happening. I don't understand entirely. Anjou didn't want him to do that because he was afraid there'd be war with Spain. Sure. Let's see. Margot fell sick in June 1583. Rumors claimed that she was pregnant by her lover, Chambellan. Anjou was displeased by her reputation and behavior, which, like, side note, the reputation that she had developed because of his friends who wrote pamphlets about how she was this nymphomaniac or whatever. So this is, again, like, he set her up to look like a slut and then was like, oh my god, you're a slut. So he expelled her from royal court, an unprecedented and humiliating measure that scandalized Europe. The Queen's court, so her court, Margot's squad, was stopped by the king's guards, and some of her servants were arrested and interrogated by the king himself personally. And part of what they were questioned about was, did Margot have a bastard child or an abortion? Where it seems pretty clear that she just either was real good at birth control or was infertile, because She had been married a long time and had several lovers and no pregnancies that we know of. Navarre heard about these rumors that Anjou had invented, and he refused to receive his wife because she's so scandalous of a person. So Margot remained for 8 months in uncertainty. I don't even know, couch surfing, like waiting for... France didn't want her, and Navarre didn't want her, and they had to negotiate with each other, like who would be stuck with her, because neither of them wanted her. After long negotiations, Margot was finally allowed to return to her husband's court in Navarre, where she received an icy reception in June 1584. So she arrived there in April. 2 months later, in June, her brother François died, and so that was the loss of her most valuable ally. With his death... So this is wild. So her brother Anjou had not had any children. None of her brothers had any children. François just died. So Catherine de Medici had so many children, but none of them had heirs. So it's just like, well, who the fuck is going to be King of France next? The next heir to the throne of France became, plot twist, Margot's husband, Henri of Navarre. Not because of his own bloodline, but because, I believe, he was married to her. So this is super unexpected to me, but to them, they're like, okay, sure. But this made... He also didn't have any children with her, remember? So no one's having any children. It's like, we need a king, and the king needs to have heirs, because then if you don't, there's religious wars. So lots of pressure on Henri of Navarre to have children with her or just with someone. So 1585, he had a new lover, hopefully an adult, named Diane d'Andoins. And she, just because everyone in this story has a nickname, she was called La Belle Corisande. She pressured him to ditch Margot and marry her instead because she was like, I can have babies, Margot can't. And then that same year, in an unprecedented gesture for a queen of the 16th century, Margot fully abandoned her husband, just like, fuck you, I'm out. She rallied the Catholic League, which are just powerful Catholics in various countries, I guess. They united... she rallied the Catholic League, which united as well the intransigent Catholics. So she just got a whole bunch of Catholics together and masterminded a coup d'etat and seized power over Angers, one of her appendages. Not sure where that is, but it's somewhere that she ruled because she is Queen of Navarre, remember? She spent several months fortifying the city, recruiting troops. She sent them to the assault of the cities around Angers, but then eventually the people of Angers got tired of her demands. I don't know, they're tired of being in this battle. They revolted against her side to take the side of her brother Anjou, so Margot had to flee. Refusing her mother's pleas that she move to a royal manor, she instead retreated to the fortress of Carlat with a new maybe lover who is Jean de Lard de Galard, Seigneur d'Abiac, and she appointed him captain of her guards. So she just hung out in a fortress for a year, and after that year, because royal troops were coming to try and take over, Margot took refuge in the castle of Ibois, a little to the north of Auvergne, as proposed to her by her mother. Can't believe the mother's still around. But when Margot got there, she found herself besieged by the royal troops who seized the fortress. She waited nearly a month for a decision on her fate. It finally came. Margaret was imprisoned by her brother Anjou in the castle of Usson. Her maybe lover, Jean de Lard de Galard, Seigneur d'Abiac, was executed in front of her. So it's just like, I don't know, she's not having good luck with lovers. Margot assumed she was going to be put to death as well, and in a farewell letter to her mother, she asked that after her execution, a post-mortem be held to prove that she was not, despite gossip, pregnant with her lover's child. But suddenly, can you believe this story is not, like, it's still going. I've got pages left. Suddenly, her jailer, the Marquis de Canillac, switched from the royal side, so he'd been supporting Anjou, but suddenly he switched over to the Catholic League side, and then he just, like, on his own, just released her. He's just like, you're free to go. Rumors at the court of France reported, because she had this wild reputation as this, like, nymphomaniac, there were rumors that she had maybe seduced him, but more likely she probably bribed him. And then she was free. And this was helpful to the Catholic insurgents because as long as she was still alive, Henri of Navarre would not have an heir, and they wanted him to not be king, so this was good for them. Despite obtaining her freedom, Margot decided to stay in the castle of Usson, and she just stayed there for 18 years. She just was and you know what she did? She read goddamn books because that was her thing. So she also trained up a new court of intellectuals, musicians, and writers. She restored the castle, so just doing some home renovations as well. Committed her time to reading many works. Even her financial condition improved when her sister-in-law, Elizabeth of Austria, began sending her half of her income. So she was still here. So in 1589, her mother died January 1589 from pleurisy. And then that same year, her brother Anjou, aka Henry III, died that August of being assassinated as he was dead. And there were no more brothers to inherit and no more heirs. The new king was her husband, Henri of Navarre. He was not a popular king. For various reasons. He suggested to Margot that they try to annul their marriage. So she was like, should we? I'm sure she'd read lots of books about oui, annulment, I don't know. So she resumed contact with him. They had just not been in touch at all to try and improve her financial situation. Let's see. Navarre became Catholic again to try and make France like him better. And I guess she was cool with the potential annulment because she knew that to be a good king of France, he needed to have a child. And she I think, knew about herself that she was sterile. So she supported the annulment, I guess. So the two of them applied to the Pope for an annulment. And they said that the reasons for the annulment were she was sterile. They were closely related as cousins or whatever. And so there's more talks between, I guess, their representatives and the Pope's representatives. Her financial situation improved because I guess she was just should I annul this marriage? I don't know. If you give me money, maybe I will. But she was displeased with who Henry of Navarre wanted to marry, which was his latest mistress, Gabrielle d'Estrées, who doesn't seem to have a fun nickname. Or she does, I don't know it. She was the mother of his son, César, who had been legitimized, but Margot considered this a dishonorable remarriage. And I don't think this is her being petty. I think this is just her, real religiousness coming out. Remember how she's always been, so, serious about stuff? But also she was a petty bitch who loved drama. She wrote, "It is repugnant to me to put in my place a woman of such low extraction and of so impure a life as the one about whom rumor speaks." So she did not want that person. So she stopped the annulment negotiation. She's like, I'm not going to annul the marriage if you're just going to marry that whore over there. But then Gabrielle the mistress died from eclampsia and negotiations were back on. I feel like at this point you'd say, did Gabrielle die of poison in gloves? But whatever. Gabrielle conveniently died. Margot demanded, in exchange for the annulment, strong financial compensation and the right to retain use of her royal title, Queen of Navarre. So there was a trial as part of this situation. Witnesses reported that Margot had been forced by her mother and brother to marry Henri, and eventually the two were granted an annulment from the Pope. A year later, guess who Henri of Navarre married? Marie de Medici, a much younger relative of Margot's from the Medici side of her mother. 9 months later, Marie de Medici had a son. She was also cool, Marie de Medici. Definitely possible future podcast subject. Once they were annulled, guess what happened? The relationship improved. Margot had been in exile for 20 years, but finally entered the good graces of the King of France, who was her husband, who I guess now is Henri IV. But let's see, she was super smart. She could spot a scheme from far off based on her entire life experience. Let's see. So her brother, Charles, who had been the king before, had a bastard son called the Count of Auvergne, whose mother had been a mistress of Navarre's. So basically she found out that her bastard nephew was going to try and usurp the throne, I guess. So she told her ex-husband, and then the Count of Auvergne was caught and all of his property was confiscated. Margot thought that as a result of this, she herself would then inherit from Auvergne the property that he had from his father. But there's just a lot of disinheritances, and Margot initiated a long trial to try and get this land. The king allowed her to return to Paris to manage her legal case to try and get this land. In 1594, Margot learned about a published work, a book that included several mistakes and false rumors about her, and she's like, I think not. And that was when, to set the record straight, she wrote her own memoirs. And she was allegedly the first woman, maybe the first royal woman, to have written memoirs. The memoirs were not published, so she wrote them in 1594, but they were not published until 1628, well after her death and the death of most of the people she had written about. And then, so, after 19 years in Usan, Margaret finally returned to Paris. Apparently, I don't know if this is for the trial. I guess so. Anyway, she finally returned. She looked a mess. Her skin was red and raw. She wore an extravagant blonde wig, and her clothes were 20 years out of fashion. But, because of this charisma thing, she won the affection of the people. In Paris, she established herself as a mentor of the arts and benefactress of the poor. She had become increasingly religious, and she was already pretty religious, so now she's like XX religious. Yeah, so she went there for the trial, and then a year later, she won the lawsuit against her bastard nephew and gained her entire inheritance from her mother. After this, so because she had no children of her own, she named as her heir the son of her ex-husband, Henri of Navarre, and Marie de Medici, who was the crown prince Louis. This was an extremely important political move for her because, so it had been the Valois dynasty were in charge of France until Henri of Navarre took over, and then it became the Bourbon dynasty, and that's where all the Louis come from. So her naming Louis as her heir basically made official the dynastic transition from the Valois family to the Bourbon dynasty, so there wouldn't be as much confusion over who was in charge. Margot, in fact, often helped plan events at court and nurture the children of her ex-husband and Marie, like their cool aunt. In 1608, in fact, Margot is named godmother of Prince Gaston. So she settled her household on the left bank of the Seine in a place called the Hostel de la Reine Marguerite. So basically the Queen Margot's place. This palace became a Parisian political and intellectual center because she's this big book nerd. She gave brilliant receptions with theatrical performances and ballets that lasted until late at night and had great patrons. She also opened a literary lounge where she organized a company of philosophers, poets, and scholars. Margot... Oh, wow. Okay. On May 13th, 1610, Queen Margot attended Marie's coronation at Saint Denis. I'm not sure why Marie was not coronated until then. She had been married to Henri of Navarre for a while. The following day, Henri of Navarre, France's King Henry IV, was assassinated by a fanatic monk. And Marie, his widow, obtained the regency for their minor child, Louis. So in that's just like a quick little paragraph where it's like so much has happened. It's like that's just a couple sentences. Sure. Fanatic monk. Okay. In 1614, Margot wrote a book called The Learned and Subtle Discourse, in which she affirmed the superiority of women over men, arguing that God and the creation of the world started from the lower creatures up to the superiors, And the woman is the last created creature, not even from the mud like Adam, but from a rib. Furthermore, the delicacy of the aesthetic forms of women reflects their perfection. She wrote, "The world is not made for man and man for God, but rather the world is made for man, man for woman, and woman made for God." So, some cool writing there from her. And then in March 1615, so a year after she wrote this thing about, like, women are the best, she became ill. She died in Queen Margot's place on March 27th, 1615. Like every French royal person who died before the French Revolution, at some point her tomb was sacked. Her casket disappeared and nobody knows where it is anymore. The end. But not really. So the thing is that Queen Margot's life is obscured by the legend of the sexy nymphomaniac Queen Margot. The myth of a nymphomaniac, an incestuous woman in a damned family. So these stories began partially because her brother was an asshole and got people to start these rumors. But then also there was a lot of anti-Valois propaganda created by the Bourbon dynasty, so the descendants of Henri of Navarre, and court historians just trying to be like, the Bourbons are great, but before them the Valois were just like so gross and awful, and Margot just became sort of the scapegoat for all of that. Many slanders were spread throughout her life, but there's one pamphlet written by Theodore Agrippa d'Aubigné were very successful in the sense that they really caught on, and subsequently these facts were handed down as if they were facts, even though they were just made up slanders. And I already mentioned Shakespeare's comedy Love's Labour's Lost is possibly based on the attempt at reconciliation between Margot and Henri. In 1630, Cardinal Richelieu and his historians initiated a campaign against Marie de Medici, Henry of Navarre's second wife. And in so doing, they systematically discredited all women and their political role, and this revived the legend of Margot, the like crazy sex queen. And then, well, I don't know, say right in one place that her brother Charles had invented her nickname, Queen Margot. But then here it says that Alexander Dumas is the one who invented, I don't know if he invented calling her Queen Margot, but he definitely popularized for a new generation what was the deal with her. And that was his novel, which the movie that I love is based on. And let's see, between the 19th and 20th centuries, some historians, such as Count Leo de Saint-Poncy, sought to rehabilitate the figure of Queen Margot, but these studies did not affect the narrative. But only since the 1990s have some historians contributed to rehabilitating the image of Margot and distinguishing between the historical figure Marguerite of Valois and the legend of Queen Margot. But this says, however, literary works and cinematographic works, such as the 1994 movie, continue to perpetuate the image of an obscene and lustful woman. And I would say it does to a point, because the film really shows her as being sort of trapped in this sort of sexy thing, but then becoming her own person. I will say the movie does not include her reading a lot of books, which apparently was a big part of the real Margot's life. But I'll also say this movie ends after La Mole is beheaded, so there's a lot that's not in there. I mean, scoring. Come on. Scandaliciousness is I was going to say 10. Then I was going to say, like, some of the stuff was alleged and made up. Did she have all these lovers? I don't know. But the fact that there are all these scandals about her, I'm going to give her a 9. Not a 10 just because it's not 100% how much of this stuff is true and how much of it was lies. But there's like a lot of juicy stuff there. Scheminess is a straight up 10, just because after a slow beginning of her accidentally trusting her family and then she learned not to. So this isn't like a scheme, but like when she stepped up to save that Huguenot who was injured, when she saved her husband's life, when she, and then, I mean, she, like, what she like usurped power over this like town and castle for a year. Like she just like got it done. Excellence in scheminess, I think. Her significance is, as per so many of these, interesting because she was not personally, she was Queen of Navarre, but like she didn't do a lot as Queen of Navarre. But I don't know, like her significance, I think, is encouraging and mentoring all of these, you know, artists and writers and having the plays and being a patron of the arts and stuff like that would have not so, I think the significance is like artistically speaking, not so much of like the course of world events. Like if she had not been sterile, then maybe someone else would have wound up being the king of France. But I feel like her significance, because she did so much and affected so many people's lives, and it said she was also patroness to the poor, which is cool of her. I'm going to give her an 8.5 for significance. Sexism bonus, straight up 10, just because she didn't want, like, her brother so awful to her, her mother so awful to her, like she just wanted to marry a guy and they made her marry some other guy, and then if it wasn't for the patriarchy, like she could have been queen and probably would have been better than any of her brothers. So that's a 10. So this is quite a score. Oh my goodness. 37.5. I thought this was going to be a big deal, and then this is the biggest of deals because Queen Margot is now far and above the champion of the Scandalous scale. I'm sure someone else will one day emerge to challenge her for this, potentially even her mother, Catherine de Medici, but yeah. 37.5. Like, the next closest to her is Joanna of Naples, 33. Agrippina, 31. Like, legendary. I knew she would be. I hoped she would be. I don't plan the scores beforehand. I truly just do it as I think of them. And that, wow. I mean, super congratulations to Queen Margot for a life well lived. And so I've been giving a little recommendation at the end of everything, and I feel like I already have mentioned it 7,000 times to you, but my recommendation today can only be the 1994 film Queen Margot, aka La Reine Margot, which it's not super easy to find. I don't know, maybe in some other countries it's streaming. In Canada it is not streaming anywhere, but you can find it if you search on YouTube for the full movie, or you can get it on disc. Maybe your local public library has it on disc. It's just a really good time. And that's, I'm just in the afterglow of like telling, I mean, I'm going to put a quiz or a poll up on Instagram tomorrow or the day after about this, but just like, you know, from the poison gloves to the fanatic monk, like what does this story, the beheadings, the lovers, the massacre, like what does this story not contain? It's legendary. And I think this is part of why I'm being careful about when I unleash a story of this magnitude, because otherwise it'll just sort of subsume everybody else's stories with how much stuff they do. So, I mean, this is a Vulgar History podcast. My name is Anne Foster, and things for you to know. So, I'm on Instagram, Vulgar History Pod, on Twitter at Vulgar History, on my Patreon, which is patreon.com/AnneFosterWriter. I've been doing one extra episode for Patreons only every month. So this, for May, I did one about Archibald Douglas, the father of Margaret Douglas, which is like quite a saga in and of itself. For June, lots of good candidates. And if you join the Patreon, you can vote on who you want me to do that episode for. And all the money from the Patreon, just so you know, goes towards me being able to do this podcast, and which takes time and effort and money. And so that helps me pay that back. There's also, I've got new merch finally for the season in the, I think the address changed for the merch store. No, it still works. It's still the same. So if you go to, the link is in the show notes, but it's teespring.com/stores/vulgar history. So what we have on offer at this point is we have a shirt that gives the definition of the word defenestration, which means the action of throwing someone out of a window. We have a she-wolf shirt, Tudor era Howard Boy fan club, and Margaret Pole's Tower of London frequent visitor punch card. Margaret Pole's Tower of London frequent visitor punch card. They're all text-based this season because that's what I'm feeling right now, and I'll put something super hilarious and cute for Queen Margot because she's just like literally a legend. Bow down to Queen Margot. And and then I super also will re-recommend the book that I got a lot of this research from, The Rival Queens by Nancy Goldstone. So I mentioned that like starting in the 1990s, people started revisiting Queen Margot, what her deal was, but Nancy Goldstone does a great job of really making it a readable and exciting story about everything that she was up to, as well as a lot about her mother, Catherine de Medici. So you can find that book and other books that I've mentioned in this podcast on the newly revamped bookshop area. So that's, the link is in the notes as well, but it's bookshop.org/lists/vulgar-history-recommends. And I've got a book list for each season. And I'm kind of dragging this out because I want to make sure this episode is longer than the Catherine Howard one, because that is what Queen Margot deserves. But I mean, honestly, like our whole thing is like living the tits out life. And Queen Margot, I mean, bravo. Like, the tits could not have been more out. Oh, and also, here, I'll put this picture in the Instagram when I post about this. But there's a scene in the movie where I think it's where she and her amazing BFF, Henriette, are going down the street, and there's just like corpses, just dead bodies everywhere from the massacre. And she's trying to find, I think, La Mole, who in the movie is her lover. And they both have masks, like fabric, wrapped around their faces, I guess, to keep out the smell of the dead bodies. I think. I don't think it's like a plague aerosols thing. Anyway, it's just very on trend for 2021 with the masks in that scene. I'll show you that because, you know what, she's just trendsetter ahead of her time. Queen Margot, the, as of now, ultimate champion of the vulgar history scandaliciousness scale. So have a good one. Take care, everybody. Keep your masks on and keep your tits out.
Welcome to the small town of Chinook, where faith runs deep and secrets run deeper. In this new thriller, religion and crime collide when a gruesome murder rocks the isolated Montana community. Everyone is quick to point their fingers at a drug-addicted teenager, but local deputy Ruth Vogel isn't convinced. She suspects connections to a powerful religious group. Enter federal agent V.B. Laureau, who has been investigating a local church for possible criminal activity. The pair form an unlikely partnership to catch the killer, unearthing secrets that leave Ruth torn between her duty to the law, her religious convictions, and her very own family. But something more sinister than murder is afoot, and someone is watching Ruth.
Chinook, starring Kelly Marie Tran and Sanaa Lathan. Listen to Chinook wherever you get your podcasts.
Nowadays, trends and news cycles change faster than we can blink. But there are some things that withstand the test of time. And if you're looking for a connection to something timeless, and maybe also a glimpse of life at a slower pace, I believe everyone can relate to the very human experiences explored in Jane Austen's novels. And that's where I come in. My name is Alison Larkin. I'm a writer, comedian, and narrator and host of the Jane Austen podcast with Alison Larkin. I spent a lot of my childhood in the part of England where Jane Austen lived and wrote, and now that I live in the States, nothing gives me a sense of homecoming quite like narrating her books. On this show, you'll listen to award-winning narration. I'll give myself a pat on the back for that, as well as conversations with actors, writers, and other fascinating people who all share a passionate love for Jane Austen. So please, join me as we embark on a wonderful journey through Jane Austen's work. Be sure to listen and subscribe to the Jane Austen podcast with Alison Larkin, wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Laura Cathcart-Robbins, and I'm the host and creator of Only One in the Room podcast. Every week, my co-host Scott Slaughter and I invite you to join us for an hour and lose yourself in someone's incredible Only One story. We talk to the realest of real people, dealing with issues like infertility, addiction, human trafficking, and body shaming. Oh, and we want to be fair, so we talk to some celebrities too. Oscar winners, New York Times bestselling authors, supermodels, and even the most decorated U.S. Winter Olympian. Everyone is invited to share their Only One story with our listeners. This podcast is for anyone who has ever felt alone in a room full of people, which is to say that this podcast is for everyone. Download Only One in the Room wherever you listen to podcasts today.